A millionaire businessman catches a poor little girl eating leftover food in his mansion, an act of desperation he considers an unforgivable crime. Then he forcibly takes the girl and brings her to the desert while she cries, begging for forgiveness. That's when the millionaire ties the child to the trunk of a solitary tree and her tears evaporate before even touching the ground. "This is so you'll never learn to not steal anything from anyone again," were his last words, before abandoning her in the middle of nowhere. The child, dehydrated and almost unconscious, seems to be living her last moments when, on the distant horizon, a majestic white horse observes all the cruelty. The animal abandons its pasture and gallops through the desert toward the girl. What this brave horse does next is surreal. Before we dive in, if you, like us, love animals, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thanks. Now, back to our tale. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the arid vastness, turning every grain of sand into a cruel, tiny ember. Heat shimmered through the air, creating mirages that danced on the horizon like mocking ghosts. In the middle of that hostile immensity, a solitary tree stood like a guardian forgotten by time, its twisted branches offering scant, desperately needed shade. Tied to its rough trunk, a girl of only 6 years cried silently. Her tears evaporated before they even touched her sun-scorched cheeks, leaving only salty trails that stung her delicate skin. Sophia, that was her name, though no one there cared to use it, trembled despite the scorching heat. Her small hands were purple where the ropes cut off her circulation, and her bare feet barely touched the rocky ground. The man's words still echoed in her mind like a persistent nightmare. "This is so you'll learn never to steal from anyone again." The gruff voice, thick with contempt, of business magnate Richard Maxwell still haunted her. He had found her in the kitchen of his sprawling mansion, desperately scavenging for food scraps she'd found in the trash. To him, it was an unforgivable crime. To her, it was simply a matter of survival. Sophia didn't understand why she was being punished. Her little stomach had ached for days, and hunger consumed her like a ravenous beast. Her mother had disappeared weeks ago, leaving her utterly alone in the world. The girl had searched for food everywhere she knew, but doors slammed shut when they saw her approach. Her dirty, ragged appearance repelled any compassion she might have found. The biting desert wind began to blow, stirring up small dust devils that danced around the tree. Sophia squeezed her eyes shut, trying to protect herself from the grit that cut her face like tiny razors. Each gust seemed to whisper promises of death, and she began to understand that she might never see another human being again. Thirst already began to torture her throat. Her cracked lips bled slightly, and her tongue felt like a piece of dried leather. She tried to find a more comfortable position, but the ropes allowed little movement. Her numb arms hung by her sides, and she felt small pangs of pain shooting up her shoulders. As the sun continued its relentless journey across the steel blue sky, Sophia began to recall happier times. She vaguely remembered her mother singing her to sleep, a warm and cozy lap, sweet words whispered in her ear. These memories seemed to belong to another life, to another girl entirely. Suddenly, a movement on the horizon caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just another mirage, but gradually the figure became clearer. It was a horse, a magnificent white horse moving elegantly across the distant dunes. The animal seemed to observe her with an intensity that made her momentarily forget her pain. The horse stopped atop a sandy rise, silhouetted against the sky like a celestial vision. Its intelligent eyes seemed to register every detail of the cruel scene unfolding before it. There was something in its gaze Sophia had never seen before, a deep, ancient compassion, as if the animal understood exactly what was happening and deemed it an intolerable injustice. For a moment that felt like an eternity, girl and horse gazed at each other across the distance. Sophia felt a strange sensation of hope blossoming in her chest. Perhaps she wasn't completely alone in the world. Perhaps this majestic horse was a sign that kindness still existed somewhere in this harsh and cruel land. The animal inclined its head slightly, as if making a silent promise, before disappearing behind the dunes. Sophia kept staring at the spot where it had been, wondering if it would return. As the sun began to decline on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, she closed her eyes and whispered a desperate prayer to any higher power that might be listening. She didn't know it, but her salvation was already on its way. Night descended upon the desert like a black cloak embroidered with stars. The stark contrast between the suffocating heat of the day and the biting cold of the pre-dawn hours made Sophia tremble violently. Her small teeth chattered uncontrollably as she tried to curl up to conserve the little warmth left in her frail body. The ropes binding her to the trunk seemed to have tightened even more in the cold, cutting into her delicate skin. But she wasn't alone. The white horse had returned silently, materializing like a silvery phantom under the full moon's glow. Its hooves made no sound on the sand, and its movements were so graceful they seemed to belong to a dream. The animal approached the tree cautiously, its large, expressive eyes fixed on the bound girl. Sophia opened her eyes when she felt a presence nearby. Seeing the majestic horse standing just a few feet away, her heart pounded. She didn't know whether to feel fear or relief. The animal was immense, with defined muscles beneath its immaculate white coat, yet there was something profoundly gentle in its posture. It lowered its elegant neck and drew even closer, sniffing the air around the girl. With a delicate movement that contrasted with its size, the horse touched Sophia's face with its velvety muzzle. The touch was warm and comforting, and for the first time since she had been abandoned, she felt that someone or something cared for her. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't just tears of despair. The horse seemed to understand her anguish. It positioned its large body to shield her from the cold wind that swept through the desert. Its thick fur and body heat created a natural barrier against the hostile elements. Sophia felt immediate relief as the wind stopped biting her exposed skin. During the hours that followed, the animal remained there as a silent guardian. It made no attempt to leave, showed no restlessness. Every now and then, it would lower its head to check if Sophia was still conscious, gently nudging her with its muzzle whenever she seemed to be dangerously drifting off. As the first rays of dawn began to lighten the horizon, the horse briefly moved away from the tree. Sophia watched with growing anxiety as it circled the area, as if searching for something. Its meticulous search was rewarded when it found a small depression in the rock where scant overnight rain had collected. With surprising delicacy, the horse wet its muzzle in the water and returned to Sophia's side. It inclined its head and allowed the precious drops to trickle from its lips directly into the girl's parched mouth. The liquid was little, but enough to moisten her throat and give her strength to go on. This ritual repeated several times throughout the morning. The horse alternated between offering water and shade, always attentive to the child's needs. Sophia began to understand that this extraordinary animal had taken on the responsibility of keeping her alive, even if she didn't know how or why. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the heat began to intensify again, the horse strategically positioned itself so its shadow covered as much of Sophia's body as possible. It remained completely still, even as the sun mercilessly scorched its back. Its devotion was absolute and incomprehensible. Sophia tried to speak to it, her voice hoarse and almost inaudible. "Thank you," she whispered, not knowing if the animal could understand. The horse turned one of its ears toward her, as if listening intently. Its intelligent eyes seemed to reflect an understanding that went beyond animal instinct. As the hours passed, Sophia began to notice details about her protector. Its mane was like white silk, fluttering in the breeze, and there were small scars on its flanks that suggested a life of hard work. Despite its majestic appearance, This was not a pampered show horse, but a working animal accustomed to adversity. What impressed Sophia most was the horse's infinite patience. It never showed irritation or a desire to leave. It seemed to have made a conscious decision to protect her, and nothing would make it change its mind. This inexplicable loyalty from an animal she had never seen before was a mystery her childlike mind couldn't decipher. When the sun reached its peak midday, the horse began to show signs of restlessness. It looked alternately at Sophia and into the distance, as if weighing a difficult decision. Its movements grew more agitated, and it began to circle the tree in small rounds. Sophia realized something was changing. The horse seemed to be wrestling with itself, torn between staying by her side and doing something else. She watched it with growing anxiety, fearing it would finally abandon her as everyone else had. Then, in a moment that would define both their destinies, the horse made a decision that would change everything. The horse moved away from the tree with hesitant steps, turning back several times to look at Sophia. In its intelligent eyes, she could see an internal struggle between the instinct to protect her and the urgent need to seek help. The girl felt her heart clench as she understood it was about to leave. "Don't go," she murmured in a weak voice, extending her bound arms toward the animal. The horse approached one last time, gently touching her face with its muzzle, as if making a silent promise. Then, with a low, melancholic whinny, it galloped toward the horizon, leaving only a cloud of golden dust behind. Sophia had never felt so alone. Despair engulfed her like an overwhelming wave, and she began to sob uncontrollably. Without the horse's protection, the sun returned to mercilessly punish her skin. Her lips cracked even further, and thirst became a constant torture. Every breath was a painful effort, and she began to understand that she might not be able to hold on much longer. Meanwhile, the horse galloped through the desert with an iron determination. Its hooves hammered the rocky ground in a steady rhythm, raising small puffs of sand with each stride. It knew every trail, every rise, every landmark of that arid region. Its mission was clear: find someone who could save the girl. Ethan Miller's ranch was several miles away, tucked behind a series of low hills. It was a modest place, with a simple brick house and a corral fenced with weathered planks. Ethan was a seasoned 52-year-old rancher, with hands calloused from hard work and a heart that held more kindness than his rugged exterior let on. He was mending a fence when he saw his horse approaching at a gallop. Thunder, that was the animal's name, never behaved like that. The horse was agitated, sweaty, and its eyes showed an urgency Ethan had never seen before. Something was terribly wrong. "What is it, my old boy?" Ethan asked, approaching carefully. Thunder refused to calm down. It ran in circles around the man, whinnying insistently and nudging him with its muzzle toward the desert. When Ethan tried to take hold of its reins, the horse dodged and continued its desperate dance. Maria Miller, Ethan's sister, came out of the house, drawn by the commotion. She was a 48-year-old woman with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun and an apron perpetually dusted with flour. Her round, kind face reflected a life dedicated to caring for others. First her elderly parents, and then her bachelor brother. "I've never seen Thunder like this," Maria commented, observing the animal's strange behavior. "Looks like he wants to lead you somewhere." Ethan shook his head, perplexed. He'd known his horse for 15 years, ever since it was just a stubborn colt. Thunder had always been smart, but he'd never shown such human-like behavior. It was as if the animal was trying to communicate something urgent and important. "Maybe he saw a snake or an injured mountain lion," Maria suggested, wiping her hands on her apron. "You know how protective he is." But Ethan knew it was something different. There was an emotional quality to Thunder's agitation that went beyond territorial protection instinct. The horse seemed genuinely distressed, as if something it had witnessed had profoundly affected it. Thunder moved a few feet away and stared fixedly at Ethan, as if waiting for the man to finally understand his message. When that didn't happen, the animal approached again and began to push the rancher's chest more insistently, almost knocking him over. All right, Ethan exclaimed, raising his hands in surrender. You want me to go with you, is that it? The horse stopped immediately and stood perfectly still, as if awaiting the man's decision. Its intelligent eyes seemed to plead for understanding, and there was something in its posture that touched the rancher's heart. Maria approached and touched her brother's arm. I'd be worried if you didn't go see what's going on. Thunder's never acted like this. It must be important. Ethan nodded slowly. His life on the ranch had taught him to trust animal instincts. They sense things humans often overlooked, especially when it came to danger or suffering. If Thunder was desperate to lead him somewhere, there was a reason. Gather some things, he told Maria. Water, some medical supplies, a rope. I don't know what we'll find out there, but it's best to be prepared. As Maria hurried inside the house to gather the supplies, Ethan quickly saddled Thunder. The horse remained perfectly still throughout the process, but its tension was palpable. With every passing second, it seemed more anxious to leave. When he finally mounted, Ethan barely had time to settle into the saddle before Thunder bolted toward the desert. The horse knew exactly where it was going, navigating the invisible trails with a precision that impressed even its experienced owner. As they galloped through the arid landscape, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what they would find at the end of this urgent journey. Thunder had never let him down before, and he was sure it wouldn't be this time. On the distant horizon, a small figure remained tied to a solitary tree, fighting against time and the elements, unaware that her salvation was on its way. The frantic gallop through the desert lasted almost an hour. Ethan held the reins firmly, but Thunder seemed guided by a higher force, navigating between the dunes and rocks with absolute certainty. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange, when they finally spotted the solitary tree on the horizon. As they drew closer, Ethan felt his heart pound. There was something tied to the trunk, something small and motionless that made his stomach churn. My God, he murmured, spurring Thunder to go even faster. Whatever it was in mortal danger. When they reached the tree, Ethan dismounted before the horse had even fully stopped. What he saw shocked him to the core. A tiny girl, no more than 6 years old, tied to the trunk with thick ropes. Her skin was sunburned. Her cracked lips bled, and she seemed only semi-conscious. Jesus Christ, what monster did this to a child? He exclaimed, kneeling beside Sophia. His trembling hands worked quickly to untie the cruel knots that cut into the girl's delicate wrists. The rope was so tight it had left deep marks on her skin. Sophia slowly opened her eyes as she felt the ropes loosen. Her vision was blurry, but she could make out the bearded, worried face of a man she didn't know. For a moment, she thought it was another nightmare, but the kindness in his brown eyes reassured her. Easy there, little one. You're safe now, Ethan said, his voice husky with emotion. He removed his shirt and wrapped it around Sophia's fragile body, shielding her from the wind that was beginning to chill. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Thunder approached and lowered its head, gently nudging Sophia's face with its muzzle. The girl managed a faint smile as she recognized her protector. You came back, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan watched the interaction between the girl and his horse with growing astonishment. It was as if they already knew each other, as if there was a deep connection between them. Thunder brought me to you, he explained, stroking Sophia's dirty, tangled hair. He knew you needed help. With extreme care, Ethan lifted Sophia into his arms. She weighed less than a bag of feed, and her tiny bones protruded beneath her dehydrated skin. Let's go home, little one. My sister Maria will take care of you. The journey back was slower and more careful. Ethan rode Thunder, holding Sophia against his chest, feeling every labored breath of the girl. She drifted between consciousness and delirium, murmuring disjointed words about her mother and being hungry. Who did this to you? Ethan asked softly. But Sophia had already fallen asleep again, too exhausted to answer. He decided the questions could wait. The important thing now was to save the child's life. When they arrived at the ranch, Maria was already waiting on the porch with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. She had seen the two approaching in the distance and realized something was wrong from her brother's posture. "My God, Ethan! What happened to this child?" she exclaimed, rushing to help. Her maternal eyes quickly assessed Sophia's condition. Severe dehydration, sunburn, rope marks on her wrists and ankles. "Someone left her tied up in the middle of the desert," Ethan explained, carrying Sophia inside the house. "If it weren't for thunder, she'd be dead by tomorrow." Maria quickly prepared an improvised bed in the living room, using her best blankets and pillows. She had cared for sick people her whole life and knew exactly what to do. "Put her here. I'll get some water and medicinal herbs." Ethan carefully laid Sophia on the bed and watched Maria work efficiently. His sister gently cleaned the girl's sunburned skin, applied homemade salves to her wounds, and gave her small sips of honeyed water to rehydrate. "She's so tiny," Maria murmured, smoothing Sophia's hair with maternal fingers. "Who could do such a thing to an innocent child?" "I don't know," Ethan replied, clenching his fists, "but I'm going to find out. And when I do, that bastard is going to pay for what he did." Sophia moaned softly and opened her eyes. For the first time in days, she felt safe and protected. The surroundings were simple, yet cozy, smelling of fresh bread and medicinal herbs. The woman caring for her had the same gentle gaze her mother used to have. "What's your name, sweetie?" Maria asked softly, offering another sip of water. "Sophia," the girl replied weakly. "My name is Sophia." "Sophia," Maria repeated with a warm smile. "What a beautiful name. I'm Maria, and this is my brother, Ethan. You're safe with us now." Ethan approached the bed and knelt beside Sophia. "Little one, can you tell me who did this to you? I need to know so it doesn't happen to anyone else." Sophia looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. For a moment, it seemed she wouldn't answer. Then, in a small, whispered voice, she said, "It was the man from the big house. He said I stole food, but I was just so hungry." Ethan and Maria exchanged indignant glances. A child abandoned in the desert for looking for food. What kind of monster would be capable of such cruelty? "Which man from the big house?" Ethan gently pressed. But Sophia had already fallen asleep again, too exhausted from the effort of speaking. Maria covered her carefully and motioned for her brother to step away. "Let her rest," she whispered. "Tomorrow she'll be stronger to tell her story." Outside, Thunder remained by the window, as if standing guard to protect the girl he had saved. He knew his mission was only just beginning. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and Sophia was beginning to show signs of recovery. Her cheeks had regained some color, and she could sit up in bed to eat the nutritious soups Maria prepared with such care. The girl, still startled at sudden movements, and constantly peered out the windows, as if expecting someone to come for her. Maria had become her protective shadow, never straying far. It was as if all the repressed motherhood of a childless life had found an outlet in this lost child. She hummed lullabies while combing Sophia's hair, told stories before bed, and prepared special porridges to strengthen her fragile little body. "Tell me about your mama," Maria softly requested, as she applied salve to the marks that still lingered on Sophia's wrists. "What was she like?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't solely of sadness. There was also a glimmer of longing and love as she began to speak. "Mama was very pretty. She had long hair like yours, and she always smelled of flowers. She worked at the big house, cleaning and cooking." "And where is she now?" Maria asked, though she feared the answer. "I don't know," Sophia replied, her voice breaking. "One day she just didn't come home. I waited and waited, but she never showed up again. Then the food ran out, and I got so hungry." Maria felt her heart clench. The story was beginning to make terrible sense. A mother who worked at a big house and mysteriously disappeared, leaving a small daughter to starve. This was no coincidence. Ethan, who had been listening from the doorway, entered the room with a somber expression. "Sophia, do you know the name of your mother's boss, the man from the big house?" The girl nodded timidly. "Mama always talked about him. Mr. Maxwell. She said he was very important and that I shouldn't make noise around him." "Maxwell," Ethan murmured, and Maria realized the name meant something to him. "Little one, do you remember his last name? What did your mama call him when she spoke to other people?" Sophia furrowed her brow, concentrating. "Richard Maxwell. Mama always said he was very rich and powerful." Ethan's face darkened like a thundercloud. Richard Maxwell was known throughout the region as an unscrupulous business tycoon, owner of several properties and ranches. His questionable practices and explosive temper were legendary, but he had enough money and influence to keep local authorities far from his dealings. "That man's a scourge," Ethan said to Maria in a low voice, stepping out of the room. "If he was capable of abandoning a child in the desert, imagine what he might have done to her mother." Maria followed him into the kitchen, leaving Sophia resting. "Do you think he—" "I don't even want to think about it," Ethan replied, slamming his fist on the table in anger. "But a woman doesn't just disappear, Maria. And what if she found out something she shouldn't have, or if she tried to protect her daughter?" The two siblings fell silent, processing the terrible implications of what Sophia had revealed. The girl was not just a victim of cruelty, she was a potential witness to something much larger and more sinister. "What are we going to do?" Maria asked, her voice trembling with worry. "If Maxwell finds out she's here—" "He won't find out," Ethan said firmly, "but we can't pretend this never happened. A child was nearly murdered, Maria. This is a crime." That afternoon, Sophia sat on the porch, watching thunder in the pasture, when Maria joined her. The horse seemed to sense her presence and approached the fence, extending its neck for scratches. "He saved me," Sophia said simply, stroking Thunder's muzzle. "I was alone and scared. And he stayed with me. Why did he do that?" Maria smiled, touched by the innocence of the question. "Some beings have pure hearts, sweetie. They can't see someone suffering without trying to help. Thunder is like that, and you're lucky to have found him." "And you two too," Sophia said, looking at Maria with sincere gratitude. "You saved me even without knowing me." "That's how good people act," Maria explained. "It doesn't matter where you come from or who you are. When someone needs help, we help." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "My mama always said that she'd give food to other poor folks even when we barely had enough for ourselves. She said kindness always comes back to those who do good." "Your mama was a wise woman," Maria said, feeling her eyes well up with tears. That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Ethan went out for a walk and to think. The ranch was silent under the moonlight, only the distant sound of crickets breaking the peace. Thunder approached him in the pasture, as if sensing the turbulence in his thoughts. "What did you see out there, old boy?" Ethan asked, stroking the horse's neck. "You knew it was a child before you even got close, didn't you?" Thunder inclined its head, its intelligent eyes reflecting the moonlight. There was something in its gaze Ethan couldn't fully decipher. An ancient wisdom, an understanding that went beyond animal instinct. "She's staying with us," Ethan said firmly. "No matter what happens, we won't let anyone hurt this girl again." The horse whinnied softly, as if agreeing with the decision, but there was something in its posture that suggested the fight was only just beginning. Richard Maxwell wasn't the kind of man who left witnesses alive, especially when they could threaten his empire of cruelty. The next day, the first storm clouds began to gather on the horizon. They weren't rain clouds, but something far more dangerous approaching the small ranch where an orphaned girl was trying to rebuild her broken life. A week had passed since the rescue, and Sophia was almost unrecognizable. Her hair gleamed clean and well-kept, her cheeks had gained a healthy rosy tint, and her eyes, once dulled by despair, now showed a rekindled childlike curiosity. Maria had found suitable clothes for her in town, and the girl looked like a normal child for the first time in months. But the peace that had settled over the Miller ranch was about to be shattered. Ethan was mending a gate late that afternoon when he saw a cloud of dust approaching along the dirt road. 3 men on horseback were heading towards the property, and something in their military-like posture immediately put him on high alert. They didn't look like friendly visitors. "Maria!" he yelled towards the house. "Get Sophia to the back room, now!" Maria, who had learned to trust her brother's instincts over the years, asked no questions. She took Sophia by the hand and quickly led her to the most hidden room in the house, whispering instructions for the girl to remain absolutely silent. The 3 men approached slowly, their horses treading carefully on the uneven terrain. The leader was a tall, thin man with a scar that cut across his left cheek from the corner of his eye to his chin. His companions looked like seasoned enforcers, with hard expressions and hands resting casually near their weapons. "Good afternoon," the leader said, not dismounting. "Are you Ethan Miller?" "That's me," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady despite the tension he felt. "How can I help you?" "My name is Jed Stone. I work for Mr. Richard Maxwell. We're looking for a child who disappeared a few days ago. A small girl, dark hair, about 6 years old." Ethan felt his heart race, but he maintained a neutral expression. "Haven't seen any child around here. This region is too isolated for a small girl to be alone." Jed studied Ethan's face with cold, calculating eyes. "It's interesting you say that, Mr. Miller, because we have information that you were seen riding through the desert a few days ago, returning with something in your arms. I hunt wild hogs occasionally," Ethan said casually. "Brought some game home. My sister made a delicious stew." One of the enforcers moved closer to the house, as if wanting to investigate on his own. Ethan took a step towards him, blocking his view of the porch. "Problem?" Ethan asked, his voice gaining a dangerous edge. "No problem," Jed said quickly, gesturing for his man to back off. "We just want to make sure the child is safe. She's important to Mr. Maxwell." "Important how?" Ethan asked, feigning curiosity. "Daughter? Granddaughter?" Jed hesitated for a moment before replying. "An employee. The daughter of one of the workers on the property. Mr. Maxwell is very concerned about her well-being." Ethan almost laughed at the blatant hypocrisy. What a caring boss. He must pay his employees very well if he's so concerned about their families. Jed's jaw clenched, revealing the provocation had hit its mark. Mr. Maxwell is a generous and fair man. He just wants to ensure the girl returns to where she belongs. "And where does she belong?" Ethan pressed. "With her family, of course." "And where is her family now?" Jed didn't answer immediately, and Ethan realized he had hit a sensitive spot. The man's hesitation confirmed his darkest suspicions about Sophia's mother's fate. "That's none of your business," Jed finally said. "We just want the girl back." "So she can be punished again for looking for food?" Ethan asked, deciding to lay his cards on the table. The atmosphere changed instantly. The 3 men tensed, and Jed's hand dropped towards the weapon in his holster. "How interesting," he said slowly. "How would you know about any punishment if you've never seen the girl?" Ethan realized he had made a mistake, but he didn't back down. "Because I know your boss's reputation. Everyone in this region knows what kind of man Richard Maxwell is." "Watch your words, Miller," Jed said, his voice loaded with menace. "Mr. Maxwell has a lot of influence around here. It'd be a shame if your property ran into difficulties." "Is that a threat?" Ethan asked, stepping forward. "It's friendly advice. If you know anything about the girl, you'd do well to contact us. Mr. Maxwell can be very generous to those who help him, and very severe with those who hinder him." Jed signaled his men, and they began to move away. But before they fully departed, he turned back one last time. "Oh, Mr. Miller, that's a fine horse you have there in the pasture. White, isn't he? Well cared for. It'd be terrible if anything happened to him." The threat against Thunder was the last straw. Ethan clenched his fists, but managed to control himself. Starting a fight now would only put Sophia in more danger. The three men rode off slowly, but Ethan knew he hadn't seen the last of them. They would return, probably with more men and less subtlety. Maria appeared in the doorway as soon as the visitors disappeared from view. "They know she's here," she said simply. "They know," Ethan confirmed, "and they'll be back." Sophia emerged from behind Maria, her eyes wide with fear. "Was that Mr. Maxwell's man?" she asked in a trembling voice. "It was," Ethan said, kneeling in front of her. "But don't you worry, little one. We won't let anyone take you from here." Sophia nodded, but tears began to stream down her cheeks. "I don't want to leave. I like you two. You're good to me." Maria hugged her tight, her heart breaking. "You're not going anywhere, sweetie. We're your family now." But as they comforted Sophia, Ethan knew a storm was brewing. Richard Maxwell wasn't the kind of man who took no for an answer. And now that he knew where Sophia was, he would move heaven and earth to get her back, not out of love or concern, but to silence her forever. The war had begun, and an innocent child was at the center of the conflict. 2 nights had passed since the threatening visit, and the tension on the ranch was almost palpable. Ethan had reinforced the locks, checked his weapons, and kept Thunder in the stable closest to the house. Maria slept in the room with Sophia, and no one went out on the property alone. They knew it was only a matter of time before Maxwell made his next move. Sophia had become increasingly thoughtful in recent days. She played less, smiled less often, and Maria frequently found her looking out the window with a melancholy expression that shouldn't exist on a child's face. On the 3rd morning, as Maria prepared breakfast, Sophia approached her with something in her hands, a small, worn, faded cloth doll. "I was hiding this," Sophia said timidly, offering the doll to Maria. "Mama made it for me when I was very little. I always carry her with me." Maria gently took the doll, noting the care with which it had been sewn despite the simple materials. "She's beautiful, sweetie. What's her name?" "Hope," Sophia replied. "Mama said, as long as I had hope, I'd never be completely alone." Maria's heart tightened at the touching innocence of the answer. "Your mama was very wise." Sophia nodded, but then her expression grew serious. "Maria, I need to tell you something. About Mama and about Mr. Maxwell." Maria stopped kneading the bread dough and gave the girl her full attention. There was something in Sophia's voice that alerted her this conversation would be important. "What is it, sweetie?" Sophia took a deep breath, as if preparing to reveal a terrible secret. "Mama didn't just disappear suddenly. The last time I saw her, she was very scared. She had found something in Mr. Maxwell's house, something he didn't want anyone to know." "What kind of thing?" Maria asked gently, sitting in the chair beside Sophia. "Papers," Sophia said, frowning in concentration. "Mama cleaned his office sometimes, and one day she saw some papers scattered on the desk. She couldn't read very well, but she recognized some names." "What names?" "Of people who disappeared," Sophia replied, her voice becoming a whisper. "Ms. Carmen Hayes, who worked in the kitchen and vanished last year. Old man Joe, who took care of the horses and was never seen again. Mama said there were many names, and they were all people who worked for Mr. Maxwell." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. "Sophia, are you sure about this?" "Yes," Sophia said, nodding energetically. "Mama got very scared and tried to leave the office without making a sound, but Mr. Maxwell appeared at the door. He saw she was looking at the papers." "And what happened then?" Sophia started to cry softly. "He got very angry. He yelled at her and said that overly curious people sometimes disappeared forever. Mama came home crying, and that night she packed a small bag and hid it under the bed." "A bag?" "She said we might have to leave very quickly," Sophia explained. "She was putting away clothes and important papers. She said if anything happened to her, I should grab the bag and run." Maria called Ethan, who was mending equipment in the yard. When he entered the kitchen and saw the two with serious expressions, he knew immediately that something important was happening. "Sophia was telling me about her mama," Maria said. "Ethan, you need to hear this." Sophia repeated the entire story for Ethan, who listened with growing indignation and horror. When she finished, his face was red with rage. "That bastard," he muttered through clenched teeth. "How many people has he killed?" "Sophia," Maria said softly, "do you know where your mama hid that bag?" "I do," Sophia replied, "under the loose floorboard in our little room. But I don't know if it's still there." Ethan stood up decisively. "We're going to find out. If that bag is still there, it might have enough evidence to put Maxwell behind bars forever." "It's too dangerous," Maria said, worried. "If he finds out you've been there, he already knows we're involved," Ethan replied. "The difference is that now we have a chance to get evidence against him." That afternoon, Ethan and Sophia rode thunder to the small settlement where the girl had lived with her mother. The place was a collection of simple shacks where Maxwell's poorest workers lived. Sophia's house was one of the smallest, just 2 tiny rooms with adobe walls and a broken tiled roof. The place was obviously abandoned weeks ago. The door was ajar, and the wind had scattered dry leaves across the dirt floor. Sophia guided Ethan to the smaller room, where she pointed to a specific floorboard. "There," she said, "Mama would lift that board." Ethan used his pocket knife to carefully pry up the board. Beneath it, in a small but well-hidden hole, was a dusty canvas bag. He carefully pulled it out and opened it. Inside were simple clothes, some personal documents, and, most importantly, a sealed brown envelope. Ethan opened it with trembling hands and found several sheets of paper with notes made in pencil in careful feminine handwriting. "Your mama made copies," he said, marveling. "She copied the names and dates from the papers she saw in Maxwell's office." Sophia leaned in to look. "Mama could write better than she let on. She always pretended to be less smart, so she wouldn't draw attention." Ethan quickly read the notes. They were lists of names, dates of disappearance, and even some observations about the circumstances. Carmen Hayes saw strange movement in Warehouse 3, disappeared the following week. Old Man Joe asked about overdue wages, vanished after argument with boss. "My God," Ethan murmured. "This is evidence of multiple murders." At the bottom of the bag, there was one last surprise. An old photo showing Sophia with a young, beautiful woman. On the back, written in the same careful hand, "To my daughter Sophia, if you ever read this, know that your mother loved you more than life itself. Fight for the truth, even when it seems impossible." Sophia held the photo to her chest and cried. She knew something was going to happen to her. And yet, she was brave enough to document everything, Ethan said, feeling a deep admiration for the woman he had never met. "Your mama might have saved many lives with that courage." As they rode back home, Ethan knew everything had changed. They were no longer just a family trying to protect an orphaned child. Now they had evidence of terrible crimes and the responsibility to ensure justice was done. But they also knew that Richard Maxwell would do anything to keep his secrets buried, including silencing forever everyone who knew the truth. That night, the Miller homestead transformed into an impromptu strategy center. The evidence found in Sophia's bag was spread across the kitchen table, illuminated by the yellow glow of a lantern. Ethan, Maria, and Sophia studied the documents with the seriousness of seasoned detectives, each name revealing an individual tragedy. "We need to take this to the authorities," Maria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Which authorities?" Ethan asked bitterly. "The local sheriff's on Maxwell's payroll. The judge owes him favors. Half the county council works for his companies." Sophia, who had been intently looking at one of the lists, raised her head. "What if we told the people in the settlement, the families of those who disappeared?" Ethan considered the suggestion. "It might be our only option, if we can get the families to speak, if more people come forward. But they're scared," Maria reminded him, "scared of losing their jobs, Scared of retaliation? Then we have to give them a reason not to be scared, Ethan said, a determination growing in his voice. We have to show them Maxwell isn't invincible. The next morning, Ethan embarked on a dangerous journey. He discreetly visited the homes of the families whose names appeared in the documents. His first stop was at the home of Bessie May, Carmen Hayes' mother. Bessie May was a 60-year-old woman, stooped by the weight of sorrow and hard labor. When Ethan mentioned her daughter's name, her eyes filled with tears. Carmen was a good girl, she said, serving coffee in chipped mugs. Hard-working, honest, never caused trouble for anyone. Ms. Bessie May, did you suspect anything when Carmen disappeared? The woman nervously looked around before replying, I suspected it, all right. But who would believe an old woman like me? They said Carmen ran off with some boyfriend, but my girl didn't have a boyfriend, and she'd never leave without telling me. Ethan carefully showed her one of Sophia's mother's notes. Do you know anything about warehouse number 3 on Maxwell's property? Bessie May paled. How do you know that? Carmen saw something there, didn't she? She came home real nervous one night, saying she'd seen men loading big sacks from the warehouse onto a truck. Sacks that looked too heavy to be just grain. The woman's voice broke. 3 days later, she didn't come home from work. Similar stories emerged from every house Ethan visited. Joe Barnes, Old Man Joe's brother, recounted how his brother had questioned the disappearance of other workers and started asking inconvenient questions. Annie Reed revealed that her husband had been threatened after catching suspicious movements in the dead of night. They all saw things they shouldn't have, Ethan told Maria when he returned home at the end of the day. And they all disappeared soon after. How many families agreed to speak? Maria asked. 7 so far. All have the same story. Relatives who asked questions or saw suspicious things, then vanished without explanation. Sophia, who was playing with her doll in the corner of the room, approached. Ethan, do you think Mama is... We don't know, little one, he said gently, but we're going to find out. And we're going to make the man who hurt all these families pay for what he did. That night, while Sophia slept, Ethan and Maria planned their next steps. They needed someone with real authority, someone not under Maxwell's influence. What about the state attorney general, Maria suggested, or the feds? That might be our best shot, Ethan agreed. But first, we need more evidence, witnesses willing to speak officially. The next day, Ethan made a second round of visits, this time asking if the families would be willing to give formal testimony. The response was discouraging. Most were too afraid to expose themselves officially. It was then that Bessie May made an unexpected suggestion. What if we held a meeting, she asked, here in the settlement, away from Maxwell's eyes? If all the families gathered, maybe we'd feel stronger. The idea quickly gained traction. Word discreetly passed from house to house, and a meeting was scheduled for the following evening in the small village chapel, a place considered neutral and sacred. Meanwhile, Thunder showed increasing restlessness. The horse seemed to sense danger in the air, staying alert and close to the house. Several times, Ethan found him staring fixedly at the road, as if expecting the arrival of unwanted visitors. He knows something's coming, Sophia said, stroking Thunder's neck. Animals always do. On the eve of the meeting, Thunder's suspicions were confirmed. Jed Stone returned to the ranch, this time accompanied by 5 armed men. They didn't bother with pleasantries. Miller, Jed shouted from the road, we know you're spreading lies about Mr. Maxwell. That needs to stop now. Ethan stepped out of the house with his shotgun in hand. Get off my property. You have until noon tomorrow to hand over the girl, Jed said, and all the papers you stole. If you don't, we'll be back with more men. We don't have any papers, Ethan lied. Jed chuckled mockingly. Of course you do. You were at the little house of that nuisance's mother. Our informants saw everything. Ethan's heart turned to ice. They had been watched longer than they realized. Noon tomorrow, Miller, or the consequences will be severe for your entire family. When the men left, Ethan knew time was running out. The meeting at the chapel could be his last chance to gather enough support to confront Maxwell. But it could also be a deadly trap for everyone involved. That night, as they prepared for the meeting that could change everything, none of them slept. Outside, Thunder stood guard, his heightened senses catching every sound and movement in the darkness. The final battle was about to begin. The village chapel was lit only by flickering candles as the families began to arrive. One by one, figures bent by suffering and fear emerged from the darkness. Moving like cautious shadows through the dirt streets, Bessie May arrived first, followed by Joe Barnes and his wife. Soon after came the parents of other disappeared individuals, all bearing the weight of inexplicable losses. Ethan had left Sophia at home with Maria, considering the meeting too dangerous for a child. But he brought with him the documents Sophia's mother had copied, knowing that those papers were the key to uniting these desperate people in a common cause. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said, his voice echoing softly in the small chapel. "I know it wasn't easy for anyone to be here tonight." Bessie May slowly stood up, leaning on the worn wooden pew. "Ethan, we came because you gave us hope. For the first time in months, someone is willing to listen to our stories." One by one, those present began to share their experiences. Joe Barnes recounted his brother Old Man Joe's last words, who had mentioned strange things happening on the property. Annie Reed revealed that her husband had found blood-stained clothes buried near Warehouse 3 just days before he disappeared. "My boy Pete was always too curious for his own good," said Grandma Rose, a frail woman with completely white hair. "He worked in maintenance and had access to all the warehouses. One day he told me there were strange smells coming from one of the storage sheds. Smells that weren't from animals or grain." Ethan showed the documents to the group. "These are copies of notes we found. They list all the names of people who disappeared, along with the dates and circumstances." The reaction was immediate and emotional. Tears, muffled cries of recognition, fists clenched in anger. Seeing their loved ones listed as victims of a systematic pattern of violence gave the families something they hadn't had in months. The certainty that they weren't crazy, that their suspicions were justified. "We need to take this to the authorities," Joe Barnes said. "We can't stay silent forever." "Which authorities?" asked Mr. Manuel bitterly, father of a young man who had questioned dangerous working conditions. "The sheriff's Maxwell's crony. The mayor owes him favors. Who's going to listen to us?" "State authorities," Ethan replied. "Federal if necessary, people who aren't on Maxwell's payroll." It was then that Bessie May made a surprising revelation. "I have a nephew who works at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Austin, Texas. He always told me if I ever needed anything, maybe he can help us." Hope began to shine in the eyes of those present. Finally, a connection to the world beyond Maxwell's influence. "But he'll need more than just our statements," Bessie May continued. "He'll need physical evidence." "And how are we going to get that?" Annie Reed asked. "We can't just break into Maxwell's property." Ethan thought for a moment before replying. "Maybe we can. Not all of us, but some. If we know exactly where to look." "It's too dangerous," Joe Barnes said. "If we get caught, if we do nothing, more people will die," Ethan replied firmly. "And those who have already died will never get justice." The discussion continued for over an hour. Plans were made, risks were weighed, and gradually a strategy began to emerge. They needed evidence from Warehouse 3. They needed contact with trustworthy authorities, and they needed protection for the families who were exposing themselves. "I'll call my nephew first thing tomorrow morning," Bessie May promised. "But you all have to promise me one thing. No one acts alone. If we're going to do this, we do it together." Everyone solemnly agreed. For the first time in months, these people didn't feel completely alone in their grief. When the meeting ended and the families began to disperse, Ethan felt a mix of hope and apprehension. They had managed to unite the victims, but they also knew Maxwell wouldn't allow his web of silence to be broken without a fight. The drive back home was tense. Ethan remained alert to every shadow, every sound in the darkness. When he finally spotted the lights of his ranch, he breathed a little easier, but as he approached the house, he realized something was wrong. There were too many lights on, and Thunder was restless in the corral, whinnying low and nervously. Maria ran to meet him on the porch. "Ethan, thank goodness you're back. We had visitors." Maxwell? Not him personally, but his men, 3 of them. They circled the house for almost an hour, shouting threats and trying to scare Sophia. Ethan felt rage rise in his throat. Where's Sophia now? In her room, trying to sleep, but she's terrified. They said horrible things, Ethan. They said if we didn't hand her over by tomorrow, they'd burn the house down with all of us inside. They won't succeed, Ethan said, hugging his sister. We talked to the families today. We're organizing a response. What if it's not enough? What if... It will be enough, Ethan interrupted, with more conviction than he actually felt. It has to be. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She sat in bed, clutching her doll Hope, and looked out the window to where Thunder stood guard. The horse seemed to understand that something crucial was about to happen. Hope, Sophia whispered to her doll. Mama said, as long as I had you, I'd never be alone. But I'm scared. What if the bad man manages to take me back? The doll, of course, didn't answer. But in the silence of the night, Sophia swore she could hear her mother's voice whispering on the wind. Be brave, my child. The truth always wins in the end. Outside, Thunder raised its head toward the horizon. Its keen instincts picked up movements in the distance, men positioning themselves, weapons being prepared, a storm gathering. Maxwell's ultimatum would expire in a few hours, and everyone knew he wasn't bluffing. The final battle was about to begin, and a 6-year-old child was at the center of it all. Dawn brought with it an almost unbearable tension. Ethan knew he had only a few hours before Maxwell's ultimatum expired, but he also knew that if he handed Sophia over, he would be condemning her to death. The only way out was to desperately accelerate their plans. Bessie May kept her promise and called her nephew in Austin, Texas, in the early hours of the morning. Fernando Oliveira was an experienced prosecutor specializing in rural crimes and corruption. When his aunt told him about the systematic disappearances and the evidence found, he was immediately interested. Aunt Bessie May, this is very serious, he said over the phone. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about a criminal organization. But I'll need more than just statements and copies of documents. What do you need, son? Physical evidence, something that proves crimes were committed, and witnesses willing to speak officially under legal protection. Bessie May looked around the small general store where she had managed to use the public phone. Several of the families from the meeting were there, anxiously awaiting the call's outcome. And if we get that evidence, will you come here? I'll come with a team of federal agents, but you have to understand, if you do anything illegal to get that evidence, I won't be able to use it. When Bessie May told the others the result of the conversation, a heavy silence descended upon the group. How could they get physical evidence legally from a private property protected by armed enforcers? It was Joe Barnes who had the idea. My cousin works for the regional water company. He does regular inspections of all the large properties, including Maxwell's. It's legal, it's official, and he can bring someone along as an assistant. Hope was rekindled in the group's eyes. If they could get someone onto Maxwell's property legally during a routine inspection, they could document evidence without violating any laws. But who would be brave enough to go? Annie Reed asked. All eyes turned to Ethan. He swallowed hard, understanding the weight of the responsibility being placed on his shoulders. I'll go, he said simply. While the plans developed in the settlement, Sophia was going through her own moments of decision. She had overheard part of the conversation between Ethan and Maria about the ultimatum, and her childlike mind was processing the terrible reality that her presence was putting her new family in danger. Maria, she said when she found the woman in the kitchen, Maybe I should go back to Mr. Maxwell. Maria stopped cutting vegetables and knelt beside Sophia. Why do you say that, sweetie? Because he'll hurt you because of me, and you're good to me. I don't want anything bad to happen to you. Maria hugged Sophia tightly, feeling tears sting her eyes. Listen closely, Sophia. We love you. You're part of our family now, and families don't abandon each other, no matter what happens. But what if? There's no but what if, Maria interrupted firmly. Your place is here, with us, and we'll fight to keep you safe, no matter the cost. That afternoon, Ethan met Eddie, Joe Barnes's cousin, at the entrance to Maxwell's property. Eddie was a thin, nervous man, 40 years old, with a tendency to sweat excessively when anxious. Are you sure about this, Ethan? Eddie asked for the 10th time. If they find out what we're doing, you're doing your job, Ethan reminded him. Routine inspection of the water system. I'm your temporary assistant. Nothing illegal about that. The gates to Maxwell's estate were imposing, wrought iron with sharp spikes, guarded by 2 armed men who carefully examined Eddie's documents before allowing them entry. The property was vast and impressive. The main house was a 2-story mansion with elaborate gardens and an ornamental fountain at the entrance. But it was the warehouses in the back that interested Ethan. The pumping system is back there, Eddie explained loudly for the benefit of the guards escorting them. We need to check the pressure and water quality. They walked through the property, Ethan memorizing every detail. There were at least 6 large warehouses, all appearing innocent from the outside. But when they passed near Warehouse 3, a distinctive smell hit their nostrils, something chemical and sweet that made him nauseous. What's that smell? Eddie asked, covering his nose. Fertilizer, one of the guards said quickly. We store agricultural chemicals there. But Ethan knew the smell of death, and that wasn't fertilizer. When they reached the pumping system, Ethan pretended to help Eddie with the measurements while discreetly observing the surroundings. Behind Warehouse 3, he noticed an area where the earth seemed to have been recently disturbed. Several piles of fresh dirt were irregularly scattered, as if something had been buried and unearthed repeatedly. Eddie, he whispered, can you create a distraction? The man nervously nodded and began making noise with his equipment, loudly complaining about a supposed fault in the meter. As the guards approached to see what was happening, Ethan moved quickly toward the disturbed earth area. What he found made him sick to his stomach. Partially buried in the soft soil were fragments of fabric and other personal items, a woman's shoe, a broken wristwatch, a partially destroyed but still legible ID card. Ethan recognized the name on the ID. Old Man Joe, Joe Barnes' brother. His hands trembled as he quickly snapped a few photos with a small camera he had hidden in his pocket. Ethan! Eddie shouted, his urgent tone indicating the guards were growing suspicious. Ethan hurried back, his heart pounding uncontrollably. They had gotten evidence, but now they needed to get out of there alive. All clear, Eddie said loudly. False alarm. The meters are working perfectly. When they finally left the property, both were sweating cold. Ethan waited until they were a safe distance away before telling Eddie what he had found. My God, Eddie murmured. We have evidence of murder. We do, Ethan confirmed. Now we need to make sure it reaches the right people before Maxwell finds out what we've done. When they returned to the settlement, the sun was already setting. Maxwell's ultimatum would expire in a few hours, but now they had something they hadn't had before, concrete proof of his crimes. The race against time had begun. They needed to contact Fernando, deliver the evidence, and get protection before Maxwell discovered his web of secrets had been exposed. On the other side of the region, Richard Maxwell was in his office, looking at the clock on the wall. It was 2 hours before noon, and he had already ordered his men to position themselves around the Miller Ranch. He didn't know that his downfall had begun with the courage of a 6-year-old girl and the loyalty of a white horse. 11:30 in the morning. Only 30 minutes remained until Maxwell's ultimatum, and the tension at the Miller Ranch was palpable. Ethan had left before dawn to deliver the photographic evidence to Bessie May, who had promised to send everything immediately to her nephew in Austin, Texas, via an express courier service. Maria was in the kitchen, packing a bag with essential clothes and supplies. They didn't know if they would have to flee quickly, but it was better to be prepared. Sophia watched her silently, clutching her doll Hope to her chest. "Maria," Sophia said softly, "if I go with them, will you be safe?" Maria stopped folding clothes and turned to the girl. "Sophia, we've talked about this. You're not going anywhere. But what if Fernando can't get here in time? What if the photos aren't enough?" Maria knelt beside Sophia, holding her delicate little hands. "Sweetie, sometimes in life we have to trust that things will work out. Ethan risked a lot to get this evidence. Now we have to have faith." Outside, Thunder was visibly agitated. The horse walked in circles in the corral, its ears constantly twitching to catch any suspicious sound. It knew danger was approaching. At 11:45, the sound of several horses galloping made Maria and Sophia run to the window. A group of 8 armed men was approaching the ranch, led by Jed Stone. But this time, they weren't just coming to threaten. They were coming to take Sophia back. "Miller!" Jed shouted, even before reaching the gate. "Time's up! We want the girl now!" Maria felt Sophia tremble beside her. "Go to the back room," she whispered, "and don't come out until I call you." But Sophia shook her head. "No, Maria. If they're going to take me, I want to be with you until the very last moment." Maria's heart broke at the girl's desperate courage. How could a 6-year-old child be so strong? The men surrounded the house, some dismounting and positioning themselves strategically. Jed remained mounted, his weapon visible in his holster. "We know she's in there," he yelled. "And we know you have papers that don't belong to you. Mr. Maxwell has been very patient, but his patience has run out." Maria stepped onto the porch, keeping Sophia behind her. "The girl is under our protection. You have no legal right to take her." Jed laughed scornfully. "Legal right? Around here, Mr. Maxwell makes the laws, and he wants the girl back. For what? To finish what he started in the desert?" Jed's expression hardened. "Watch your words, Ma'am. Mr. Maxwell is a generous man. He merely wants to correct the child's improper behavior. Correct it by leaving her to die of thirst, tied to a tree." "Prove that happened," Jed challenged. But there was something in his eyes that revealed he knew exactly what his boss had done. It was then that the sound of approaching engines made everyone look toward the road. 2 black pickup trucks were arriving at high speed, kicking up clouds of dust. "Reinforcements for Mr. Maxwell," one of the enforcers said to Jed. But when the vehicles stopped, those who emerged were no longer just enforcers. They were uniformed federal agents, led by a man in a suit whom Maria didn't recognize, but who radiated authority. "Fernando Oliveira from the U.S. Attorney's Office," the man announced, showing his identification, "and you are all under arrest for racketeering, threats, and attempted kidnapping." Jed and his men were paralyzed for a moment, unsure how to react. They were used to dealing with corrupt local authorities, but they had never faced federal agents. "You have no jurisdiction here," Jed protested, his voice losing its former confidence. "Yes, we do," Fernando replied calmly. "Crimes that cross state lines, corruption of local authorities, and serial murders are definitely within our purview." Maria felt her legs weaken with relief. "How did you get here so fast?" "My aunt called me last night," Fernando explained. "The evidence we received this morning was the confirmation we needed. We had already been investigating rumors about disappearances in this region for months." As the federal agents handcuffed Jed and his men, Fernando approached Maria and Sophia. "You must be Sophia," he said gently, kneeling to be at the girl's height. "I'm Fernando, Bessie May's nephew. I've heard about your courage." Sophia looked at him with wide, curious eyes. "Are you going to arrest the bad man?" "Yes, we are," Fernando promised. "And you will help us by telling us everything you know about him. And my mama. Will you find my mama?" Fernando exchanged a look with Maria before answering. We'll do everything we can, sweetie. Now we have enough evidence to turn Maxwell's entire property upside down. At that moment, Ethan arrived galloping on Thunder, having seen the trucks from the road. When he realized they were federal authorities arresting Maxwell's enforcers, a huge smile spread across his face. "You made it in time," he shouted, dismounting quickly. "Actually," Fernando said, "we arrived exactly when we needed to. Your photographic evidence was crucial. We found at least 5 bodies buried in the area you documented." Sophia gripped Maria's hand tightly. 5 people, 5 families who will finally get justice, Fernando said softly. "Thanks to your mother's courage in documenting the crimes, and your courage in surviving to tell the truth." As they watched the enforcers being led away, Sophia asked a question that had been pounding in her mind. "And Mr. Maxwell, is he going to be arrested too?" Fernando smiled. "At this very moment, he's being arrested at his mansion by an even larger team of federal agents. He won't escape this time." For the first time in weeks, Sophia genuinely smiled. The doll Hope in her arms was no longer just a symbol of distant hope. It was the confirmation that sometimes, even against all odds, justice prevails. Thunder approached the group and gently nudged Sophia's face with its muzzle, as if understanding that its mission of protection had been successfully completed. The battle was won, but the war for truth was only just beginning. There were still questions to be answered, especially about the fate of Sophia's mother. 3 days after Richard Maxwell's arrest, his property had been transformed into a massive crime scene. Federal forensic teams worked tirelessly, excavating suspicious areas and cataloging evidence. Fernando had kept Ethan informed about the progress of the investigations, but there was still no news about Sophia's mother. Sophia was in the kitchen with Maria, helping prepare cookies, when Fernando arrived with an expression she couldn't decipher. He was accompanied by a uniformed police officer and carried a folder full of documents. "Sophia," he said softly, sitting at the kitchen table, "I need to talk to you about your mother." Sophia's heart pounded. For days, she had alternated between hope and despair, imagining every possible scenario. Maria approached and placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "We found very important evidence on Maxwell's property," Fernando continued, "and some of it led us to places we didn't expect." Sophia clutched her doll Hope to her chest. Is she dead?" "No," Fernando said, and Sophia felt as if she could breathe again. "Your mother is alive, Sophia, but she's in a very complicated situation." Tears of relief began to roll down Sophia's cheeks. "Where is she? Can I see her?" Fernando exchanged a look with the accompanying officer. "She's in a hospital in another city, about 125 miles from here. Maxwell didn't kill her, but he did terrible things to her." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of things?" "When your mother discovered the documents about the disappearances, Maxwell kidnapped her. He held her prisoner on an isolated property, along with 2 other women who had also discovered his secrets." Sophia frowned, trying to understand. "But why didn't he? Why is she still alive?" "Because your mother is very clever," Fernando explained with a sad smile. "She convinced Maxwell that she would be more useful alive. She offered to work for him, to help cover up the crimes, in exchange for keeping you both safe." "She did that for me," Sophia murmured, understanding the enormity of her mother's sacrifice. "Yes, she did. But Maxwell didn't keep his end of the bargain. When he found out you were looking for food in his mansion, he decided to teach you a lesson by abandoning you in the desert. Your mother didn't know what had happened to you." Ethan, who had entered the kitchen during the conversation, clenched his fists. "How long was she a prisoner?" "Almost 3 months, the officer replied. "She and the other 2 women were in terrible condition when we found them. Malnourished, traumatized, but alive." Sophia jumped from her chair. "Can I see her now? Please." Fernando nodded. "In fact, that's why I'm here. She's eager to see you too." "But Sophia, you need to be prepared. Your mother has been through very difficult things. She'll need time to recover. I don't care, Sophia said firmly. I just want my mama back. The drive to the hospital was tense and full of expectation. Sophia was in the back seat of Ethan's pickup, clutching her doll and anxiously looking out the window. Maria held her hand, offering all the support she could. When they arrived at the hospital, Sophia ran through the corridors, following Fernando to a room on the second floor. He stopped at the door and turned to her. Remember, your mother might look a little different, but her love for you has never changed. Sophia nodded and entered the room. The woman in the bed was much thinner than she remembered, with deep circles under her eyes and hair that had lost its luster. But when their eyes met, Sophia knew immediately it was her mother. "Sophia!" the woman exclaimed, trying to sit up in bed. "My daughter, my baby!" Sophia ran into her mother's arms, and for a moment the world around them disappeared. She was back in the place where she had always felt safest, in the loving arms of the woman who would give anything for her. "Mama, I thought you had abandoned me," Sophia sobbed. "I looked for you everywhere." "Never, never," her mother said, kissing her hair and holding her as if she would never let her go. "I fought every day to come back to you, every single day." They cried together for long minutes, years of separation and fear dissolving in the relief of reunification. Maria, watching from the doorway, felt tears rolling down her own face. "Mama," Sophia finally said, pulling back a little to look into her mother's eyes, "I met some very good people, a family who saved me when I was alone." Her mother looked at Maria and Ethan with infinite gratitude. "You took care of my daughter? She took care of us too," Maria said simply. "Sophia is a special girl. She taught us a lot about courage." "And there's a horse," Sophia said excitedly. "A white horse named Thunder who saved me in the desert. He's my friend." Her mother smiled for the first time in months. "A hero horse? I have to meet this Thunder." Fernando discreetly approached. "Sorry to interrupt, but there are some legal matters we need to resolve. Sophia, your mother will need to stay in the hospital for a few more weeks to recover fully." "And then," Sophia asked, "will we be able to stay together?" "Of course you will," Fernando said. "Your family." Sophia looked at Maria and Ethan with concern. "But they're my family now too." Her mother followed her daughter's gaze and understood immediately. "Sophia, do you want us all to be one family?" "I do," Sophia said with conviction. "Maria taught me to cook, Ethan taught me about horses, and Thunder protected me when I needed it. They loved me when I had no one." Maria approached the bed. "If you want, your daughter will always have a place in our home. And you too." "You saved more than just my daughter's life," Sophia's mother said, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved our entire family." At that moment, with everyone gathered around the hospital bed, Sophia finally felt all the pieces of her life falling into place. She had lost her mother, but found an extended family. She had suffered in the desert, but discovered the kindness of strangers. She had faced evil, but seen justice prevail. The girl who had been abandoned to die was now surrounded by more love than she had ever imagined possible. "Hope," she whispered to her doll. "You were right. I was never truly alone." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in golden hues that promised a better tomorrow. 6 weeks had passed since the reunion at the hospital. Sophia's mother, whose name was Helena, had recovered enough to be discharged. But the emotional scars of captivity were still slowly healing. She had moved to the Miller Ranch, where everyone discovered that forming an extended family was more natural than anyone had imagined. On that Tuesday morning, Fernando arrived with important news about Richard Maxwell's trial. He found the family gathered on the porch, where Sophia was teaching her mother how to brush Thunder's mane. "How's our little hero today?" Fernando asked, smiling at Sophia. "Good," Sophia replied happily. "Mama can already brush Thunder without being scared." Helena smiled shyly. She still had occasional nightmares and startled at sudden noises, but she was getting stronger every day. The therapy she was doing in town was helping, and having Sophia safe in her arms every night was the best medicine. "I have news about the trial," Fernando announced. Richard Maxwell was sentenced to 45 years in prison without possibility of parole. A heavy silence fell upon the group. After months of fear and uncertainty, they finally knew for sure that the man who had terrorized their lives would never again be a threat. "What about the others?" Ethan asked. "Jed and the enforcers?" "All sentenced too. Sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. The judge was very clear. Crimes against children and premeditated murders will be met with no leniency." Sophia, who was listening intently, asked a question that surprised the adults. "Fernando, are the other families okay now?" "Yes, sweetie. Bessie May was finally able to give her daughter Carmen a proper burial. The other families also got that closure, and they all asked me to thank you." "Me? Why? Because your courage in surviving and telling the truth is what allowed all these families to finally get justice for their loved ones." Helena hugged Sophia proudly. "My daughter was always brave, even when she was too young to understand what she was facing. And there's one more thing," Fernando said, pulling an official envelope from his folder. "The state will pay compensation to all the victims' families. That includes you two." Helena took the envelope with trembling hands. "How much?" "Enough to ensure Sophia has a complete education and you both have a comfortable life. Richard Maxwell had many assets, and all were confiscated by the state." Sophia looked at her mother with curiosity. "Does that mean we're rich now?" Helena laughed, the first genuinely joyful sound she had made in months. "It means we're free, my daughter. Free to choose our own future." That afternoon, the extended family gathered to make an important decision. Helena had offered to buy her own property with the compensation money, but Sophia had made a counter-proposal that touched everyone's heart. "Why don't we all stay together here?" she asked. "We can make the house bigger, buy more horses to keep Thunder company, and plant a big garden where everyone can work together." Maria looked at Ethan, who nodded with a smile. "You know what, Sophia? That might be the best idea anyone's ever had." Helena immediately agreed. "If you'll have us, we'd love to stay. This house has more love than any mansion ever could." Plans quickly began to take shape. With the compensation money, they would expand the Miller home, building additional rooms and improving the infrastructure. Helena, who had a talent for sewing, would open a small sewing studio in town. Ethan and Maria would continue their ranching operation, but now with resources to expand. "And I'm going to learn to ride properly," Sophia declared. "Thunder taught me that horses are the best friends anyone can have." Thunder, as if understanding he was being praised, approached the porch and rested his head on Sophia's shoulder. The horse, who had initiated the entire chain of saving events, was now officially part of the family. A week later, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from a journalist from a national magazine who had heard about Sophia's story and wanted to write an article about child courage and rural justice. "They want to tell our story to the whole country," Helena said, reading the letter. "Why?" Sophia asked. "Because stories like ours give hope to other people going through difficult situations," Ethan explained. "They show that even when all seems lost, there are still good people in the world." Sophia thought for a moment. "If our story can help other children like me, then I guess we should tell it." The interview happened a month later. The journalist was impressed not only by Sophia's courage, but by how a tragedy had united strangers into a genuine family. "What was the hardest part of this whole experience?" the journalist asked Sophia. "Thinking I was alone in the world," Sophia replied after reflecting. "But I found out I was never really alone. There was always someone. Thunder, Ethan, Maria, even my mama when she was far away, fighting to protect me." "And what was the most important thing you learned?" Sophia looked around the room, seeing her extended family gathered, Helena quietly sewing, Maria preparing dinner, Ethan mending equipment, and Thunder grazing peacefully outside the window. "I learned that family isn't just who you're born with," she said, with a wisdom that was impressive for someone so young. "Family is who chooses to stay with you even when things get tough." The journalist discreetly wiped a tear from her eyes. "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" Sophia smiled, hugging her doll, Hope. "I want to help other children who are alone, and I want to have a lot of horses, because they know things adults sometimes forget." "What things?" "That protecting the innocent is always the right thing to do, even when it's dangerous." When the article was published, Sophia's story spread across the country. Letters arrived from children in similar situations, from families offering help, and from authorities promising to be more vigilant about crimes in rural areas. But for Sophia, the real victory wasn't in national fame. It was in the mornings she woke up knowing she was safe. In the afternoons, she helped Maria in the kitchen. In the evenings, her mother sang her to sleep. And in the moments, thunder greeted her with that gentle nuzzle that had saved her life. The girl who had been abandoned to die in the desert had become the center of a family that chose love over fear, justice over silence, and hope over despair. 6 months after the trial, the Miller Ranch had transformed completely. The original house had been lovingly expanded, gaining spacious rooms, a larger porch, and a spacious kitchen where the whole family gathered for meals. What was once a simple property belonging to a single rancher now pulsed with the energy of a united and prosperous family. Sophia was sitting on the corral fence, watching the sun rise over the golden fields. At 7 years old, she had visibly grown, not just in height, but in confidence and serenity. Her hair gleamed healthy in the morning wind, and her eyes reflected a calm wisdom that came from someone who had faced darkness and chosen light. Thunder approached the fence, as he did every morning for the past few months. Their ritual had become sacred. She would stroke his muzzle, while they conversed in whispers only they understood. The white horse seemed to have aged with dignity, his mane now tipped with silver at the ends. But his eyes retained the same compassionate intelligence that had saved a desperate girl in the desert. "Good morning, my hero," Sophia whispered, offering him an apple she had saved from breakfast. "Today's a special day, you know." Thunder chewed the apple thoughtfully, as if truly understanding the day's importance. It was the 1-year anniversary of Sophia's rescue, and the family had planned a special celebration. Helena appeared on the porch, drying her hands on her apron. She was unrecognizable compared to the fragile, traumatized woman who had left the hospital. Her hair had regained its luster, her face had a healthy color, and her eyes shone with a genuine happiness that seemed to radiate from within. "Sophia, sweetie, come help Mama with the party preparations." "Coming, Mama," Sophia replied cheerfully, giving Thunder one last stroke. "Lots of people are coming to meet you today, my friend. Are you ready to be famous?" Helena's sewing studio had become an unexpected success in town. Her delicate and meticulous creations attracted customers from several neighboring towns, and she had even trained 2 young women from the settlement as apprentices. The work not only brought her financial independence, but also a sense of purpose that helped her heal the wounds of the past. Maria was in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of a feast that promised to feed half the county. Bessie May had arrived early with her granddaughters to help, and the house buzzed with female laughter and the aroma of fresh bread and homemade sweets. "Maria, do you think we made too much food?" Helena asked, looking at the enormous pots that filled the entire stove. "Impossible," Maria replied with a smile. "Half the region will be here today. Fernando is coming with his family. The victims' families, the journalists, and even the governor said he might show up." Sophia ran into the house, her bare feet making soft noises on the polished wood. "Can I help decorate the cake?" "Of course, dear," Bessie May said, lifting Sophia so she could reach the table. "But be careful not to smudge the new dress your mama made for you." The dress in question was a work of art, light blue fabric with delicate white horse embroideries. Helena had spent weeks working on it, each stitch sewn with maternal love. Ethan entered through the back door, sweaty but smiling. He had spent the morning arranging chairs and tables in the yard, preparing the space to receive all the guests. "How are the preparations coming along in here?" he asked, stealing a small piece of candy from the pot. "Stop that, Ethan Miller," Maria chided, but her words held no real irritation. "You'll spoil your appetite before the party starts." "Impossible," Ethan laughed. "Today's a day for celebration, to celebrate life, to celebrate justice, to celebrate our family." Sophia stopped decorating the cake and looked around the kitchen filled with people she loved. A year ago, she had been tied to a tree in the desert, hopeless and without family. Now she was surrounded by more love than she had ever dreamed of. "Ethan," she said thoughtfully, "do you think bad people like Mr. Maxwell are born bad, or do they become bad?" The question caught everyone by surprise. Ethan knelt beside Sophia, carefully considering his answer. "You know, little one, I think everyone is born with the capacity to be good or bad. The difference lies in the choices we make throughout life. Some people choose fear and greed, others choose love and compassion. And we chose love, right? Yes, we did. Every single day." The first guests began to arrive in the mid-afternoon. Fernando brought his wife and 2 children, who immediately fell in love with thunder. The victims' families came in groups, many bringing photos of their lost loved ones to share happy stories about them. Bessie May had organized an impromptu memorial under the largest tree in the yard. Photos, flowers and candles in honor of those who couldn't be present to see justice served. Sophia approached the memorial with her doll Hope in her arms. "Are they watching the party from somewhere?" she asked her mother. "I'm sure they are," Helena replied, kneeling beside her daughter. "And they're proud to know that their stories helped protect other families." The most emotional moment of the party came when Fernando asked for everyone's attention to make a special announcement. "You know that Sophia's story has inspired important changes in our region," he began. "The governor has created a special task force to investigate crimes in rural areas. But there's something else." He turned to Sophia with a special smile. "Sophia, because of your courage in facing injustice and your determination to protect other families, you have been chosen to be our state's first junior ambassador for human rights." Sophia looked at her mother in confusion. "What does that mean?" "It means," Fernando explained, "that you will travel to schools and communities, telling your story to teach other children about courage and justice. And whenever a child in our region needs special protection, you'll be one of the first people we consult." The applause was deafening. Sophia blushed with shyness, but waved to the crowd with a radiant smile. As the sun began to set, tinting the sky in golden and pink hues, Sophia found herself back at the corral fence, this time accompanied by several children who had come with their families. All wanted to meet Thunder and hear the story of how he had saved Sophia. "Thunder isn't just an ordinary horse," Sophia explained to her fascinated audience. "He has a special heart that knows when someone needs help." One of the children, a shy 5-year-old girl, raised her hand. "Sophia, have you been scared again since what happened?" Sophia seriously considered the question. "Sometimes I do get scared, but then I remember I'm not alone. I have my family, I have Thunder, and I have my doll Hope. And I remember that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are scared." When the party ended and the last guests departed, the family gathered on the porch to watch the stars appear in the dark sky. Sophia was nestled between Helena and Maria, with Ethan slowly rocking in his usual chair. "Mama," Sophia said softly, "do you think we'll be happy like this forever?" Helena kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I think happiness isn't a place where we arrive and stay forever. It's something we build every day, with love, care, and the right choices. Like we built our family. Exactly how we built our family." From the pasture, Thunder watched the family gathered on the porch, his intelligent eyes reflecting the starlight. He had fulfilled his mission of protecting the innocent girl, but he knew his vigilance would never completely end. There would always be people needing protection, children needing hope, families needing improbable heroes. But that night, under the starry sky, with a family united by love and strengthened by overcome adversity, Thunder allowed himself to relax. The girl he had saved in the desert was now a strong and wise young woman, surrounded by people who would give their lives to protect her. Sophia looked at the stars and whispered a prayer of gratitude. For Thunder, who saved her, for Ethan and Maria, who took her in, for her mother, who sacrificed everything for her, for Fernando, who fought for justice, and for all the good people who had appeared in her life when she needed them most. The girl who was abandoned in the desert to die had become a beacon of hope for other children in danger, and on the horizon of her new life, full of love, purpose, and endless possibilities, the future shone as golden as Thunder's coat under the morning sun. True wealth, she had learned, was not in money or power, but in the ability to transform suffering into compassion, tragedy into triumph, and despair into unwavering hope.